the Gospel according to John. Don't be daunted by the fact that we're going to be in this for 8 weeks. You know, I often don't tell people like we're doing a series for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever, just in case they get, that's a long time. But it's rich. I know we enjoyed the recent series in James. If you didn't enjoy it, we enjoyed studying it and delivering it. But the feedback we got was really helpful. And that's what we're about. We want to help you. I talked last week about the centrality in our belief and in who we are as a church of the Bible, and the fact that actually, if you want to know truth, or if you want people to know the right things, to help them to read the Bible for themselves, to help them to understand the Bible, to make the Bible a special place. Now, I understand that sales of real live paper books went up last year by about, was it 16% or something like that? And books on Kindle, etc., dropped. And it doesn't surprise me. It's the same reason why vinyl has made a comeback, because it's tactile, you touch it, you own it, you feel it, and so you engage. You know, and in a world where we like to participate and we like to engage, you know, in a book you engage more with it. You can make your own little notes, personalise it, hand it on. I've got some books that were handed on by my father, and I don't read them much, but what's interesting is flick through the little notes that he's made on them, and old Bibles that I've got that he wrote in and he made little comments on. So I'm a lover. I use both. So I've got iPad and I've got written notes and I've got Bible. And why not? They're all available and they all serve a purpose. But if you're not a book person, wow, there's some fantastic things on your phone, on tablets, on your computer, whatever that you can get to help you with the Bible. Come and talk to us. We will produce something in the next couple of weeks to just give you a few pointers, places you can go to, things that you can use, and also perhaps a few books that might help you to read John. But what I like to do today is not give you all that stuff, because I'm going to say, read John's Gospel. You know, over the next week or two, try and read John's Gospel maybe more than once, and have a little notepad and just write down what it says to you. Don't try and be kind of ultra theological, but it says, God, what have you got to say to me? And as you read it, whether you read it all through in one go or you read it chapter by chapter or however, just have a little notepad and just write down what you feel God's saying to you through it. Maybe a particular insight on something. Maybe you've come to something and think, what is that about? And you write down, you know, explain, I need to understand what this is. And two things you can do about that is ask God, because he jolly well wrote the thing. Okay, people physically did it, but we believe they were inspired by God to do that. So God's probably the best interpreter there is, but you can go and ask somebody else as well. You can go and ask somebody who may know a little bit more, or do some research, and we'll try and help you with that. But first of all, read the text. So, God, what's this saying? Get to grips with it yourself. I'd like to read from Isaiah 55 and verses 8 to 9. Isaiah 55's a tremendous chapter, and it's inviting you. This is God inviting you, you know, as you read in this chapter, God inviting you to come to him, inviting you and saying, look, come to me, I can supply actually everything you need. Why do you go elsewhere? You know, and so that's the early part of the chapter, which is amazing. But it's verses 8 and 9 I want to bring out. My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, says the Lord, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine. For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. The rain and snow come down from the heavens and stay on the ground to water the earth. They cause the grain to grow, producing seed for the farmer and bread for the hungry. It is the same with my word. And we'll stop there. But it's those two verses, 8 and 9, the same thing. So God says, my thoughts are higher than yours. Yeah. Just as far as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my thoughts. And we'll come back to that in a minute. I remember many years ago, I was a teenager, and I was an eyewitness to an accident. I was walking from our house, we lived in Walthamstow, East London, walking from there to church. I think I was going to church, and walking through the sort of back roads there. Walking is something probably don't do that much of now, but in those days, you used to do it all the time. And I saw an accident, and this was an accident at an intersection, the crossroads there, and I saw it, and I thought I better hang around because they might need some witnesses. And sure enough, they did, and I hung around long enough to give a statement to the police. But I noticed that also that the police took witness statements from several other people who were standing in different parts of the intersection to that which I was standing. And so I noticed for that, I thought, that's interesting, because what we would have all seen would be slightly different. We saw the same accident, but we all had a different viewpoint. We saw a different aspect. And by getting several statements, you can piece together the whole story much better. And I can't remember what the accident was. It wasn't very serious, but I do remember that. Okay, that's interesting. That's what stuck with me. Going all the way back to when I was studying at theological college, one person that I'd looked at in some depth, who I've mentioned recently, was the reformer Martin Luther. Now I of course could not meet him because I'm not as old as I look. I'm not 500 years old or whatever. But I sought to get to know him through some of his writings and a number of books and articles that were written about him. What was he like? What did he think? So I read a number of things in order to come to some conclusions and be able to write about it or debate about Martin Luther by finding as much evidence as I could externally that was around that would help me. One book can very easily be not necessarily biased, but it's one person's viewpoint. And none of us are neutral. We all bring with us what we've got. And so I'd read a number of things to help me to understand and to help me to know what it was. We've got an election coming up. Yeah, I'm sure you're all really happy. And you might have already started reading the manifestos. I know there are people in my family that will read all the manifestos and will have a look. Why? Because they don't just want to kind of take the popular, 1% of what's going on that we were given. They want to actually find out, well, what are these people saying for themselves? What they're saying, what the other people are saying. I don't want to know what he's saying through this person. Let me read and let me see what that person has to say. You might read various newspapers. For instance, you might read the Telegraph and the Guardian because you might get different views. One's more on the right wing, one's a more liberal paper. So you might get that to help you. Remember when I was at school, that's even further back, doing that, reading newspapers that gave you different views. I wasn't interested in just in those days, the Times, pre-Murdoch days, but it was a good paper. Sorry, making comments here, but it's true. It was a good paper back in the 60s and the 70s. But actually I preferred to read things like the Guardian and the Telegraph, which were particularly pushing a point of view, because that helped me understand what people are saying, helped me see the different points of view, and do that. And all that helps to build a picture, perhaps, of what's going on so that you can make an informed choice, so that you can make an informed decision. And God, in his great wisdom, has handed us down 4 Gospels. 4 Gospels, so that we might be better introduced to Jesus. 4, not 1. But the Gospels have a harmony together. Some people might focus on what would appear to be different accounts and see contradictions. Others will see, as I do, 4 different views of the same person and the same events, and find that comforting that we haven't got just one account, but actually we've got several accounts. Back in the early 2nd century, there's a chap called Tatian who tried to harmonise the 4 Gospels. He thought, 4, that's way too many. That will confuse people. Let's put them all into one. And he wrote something called the Diatessaron, where he kind of tried to harmonise the 4 Gospels into one text. There's another person about the same time called Marcion, and Marcion, well, he just wanted Luke's Gospel and the writings of Paul, and he said all the rest don't really matter. But fortunately, the early church settled on the 4 handed down accounts, the Gospels that we have now, Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, 4 handed down accounts from eyewitnesses who'd all got direct apostolic attestations and connections. And so they said, no, we've got these 4. We're not cutting them out because they might not all say what, it might cause us a bit of difficulty, but these are all attested to be true accounts and right accounts. And it's for the reader to read and understand better who Jesus is through them. John's Gospel, often known as the 4th Gospel, not just because it's the last in here, it was actually the last written, but because it's different as well. It's written from a different standpoint, I believe. Hence our title, views from a different plane. I believe John's Gospel comes from a whole different place to the 3 Gospels, the Synoptic Gospels, those that are pretty much give the same stories and together. But John's Gospel stands out. They're all written so that we might understand who the real Jesus is. And having these 4 accounts gives us a richness and a depth that we wouldn't have got through one. So who is Jesus? That perhaps is the biggest thing. Who is Jesus? Who is God? Is what John wants us to know and what John wants us to understand. The verses we read in Isaiah 55, 8 and 9 speaks about God being just way beyond us. So I was looking up at the sun, and the sun looks very close by sometimes. It's probably not, I wasn't looking today because it was pretty cloudy, but it's 93 million miles away. Light, though, travels at 186,000 miles a second, and it can get from the sun to Earth in 8.3 minutes. Now, if you put Lewis Hamilton in a Formula One racing car, and he could drive at 200 miles an hour without ever having to stop, maybe it'd be a robot version of Lewis Hamilton, I don't know, because there are certain things you have to do, and travelled non-stop at 200 miles an hour in a Formula One car, I know because it's space, but just humour me, that distance would take 53 years of non-stop driving. That's just the sun. What about the next solar system to ours? Well, you can get the fastest spacecraft, which I think can go about 35,000 miles an hour, to head for the nearest solar system, and it will take 81,000 years to get there. And that isn't even getting anywhere near what the universe has to offer. That gives you some sort of picture. If we put you in a spacecraft, put you in cryogenically froze you for the next 81,000 years, you might just hit the next solar system. The Bible says God is way beyond. God is beyond us. God is beyond us. And what I see with the other Gospels and the way in which we look at things is that we are trying to understand God who's way beyond. But John says, in the beginning is God. God says God is God and Jesus is God, and he is coming to reveal to you. He came down to reveal himself to us because the gap is so big, the distance is so big, the comprehension and understanding is so great that we couldn't begin to fathom him. John starts his account by saying that Jesus is God. He doesn't leave that open for debate. And because he is, everything else follows. He finishes his gospel in chapter 20:31. These things are written that you might believe. And so Jesus is God, and John's writing so that we might believe. Believe what? That Jesus is the Messiah, he says, the Son of God. We need to believe that. And then, what happens then? Well, such a belief will lead to a dramatic consequence. John says, you will have life. But life comes through the Son. Life without the Son, we read, is not real life. It's not life in all its fullness. It's existence. But it isn't life in all its fullness. John's Gospel says, hey, in the beginning was... In the beginning. Echoing, of course, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning was God. Yeah. And so we're looking up and we're looking to see what God's perspective is. Often we're looking up trying to find out, trying to discover, but actually God's come down to us and Jesus reveals who God is. A view from above. We try to understand things by looking and examining. And John gets us to start by seeing what has been revealed already and then following from the understanding that flows from who Jesus is. And so we come to John's Gospel and we come to the first chapter. And the first 18 verses are referred to as the prologue. The section is like an overture at the start of an opera. What's an overture? It's an introduction to something more substantial that's going to follow. Here's a quick kind of resume of what's happened. Those of you that write essays or stories often right at the beginning in your opening part of your essay or story, you'll explain what you're going to do in the rest of it, and then you go on and do it in detail. And that's what John does with the prologue. He gives us an overture. And in it we can find major themes that we will find throughout the gospel. We'll see titles, the Word, and Son. And Son of God are particularly strong in John's Gospel. But this title, the Word. In the beginning, life starts with God. All our answers come from God. Jesus doesn't just come from God, but he is God. The origin of the species is God. The origin of the human race is God. Come up with whatever science you want, but that's the origin. That's what John says. It's God. We've said God is high and we can't understand him except if he reveals himself. And that's what John's saying, that God reveals himself to us. Look and see, listen, understand Jesus. The Lamb of God is one of the titles. The Word we've said. Jesus uses his sayings, I am. We'll see the Son of God used all the way through. And that shows that Jesus is involved in everything. He comes and shows God to the world in his life, words and actions. If we've seen Jesus, we've seen God. Jesus is the direct revelation of God to us. Here in the prologue, the thought of the word is apt as a self-expression. We're just going to read verses from John 1. We'll read this prologue. John 1:1. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. It's pretty unequivocal, isn't it? God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. God sent a man, John the Baptist, to tell about the light so that everybody might believe because of his testimony. John himself was not the light. He was simply a witness to tell about the light. The one who is the true light, who gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He came into the very world he created, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. If you want to stand up for your rights, that's the right to stand up for, that you can be children of God. They are reborn, not with a physical birth resulting from human passion or plan, but a birth that comes from God. So the Word became human, or flesh, and made his home amongst us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, 'Someone is coming after me who's greater than I am, for he existed long before me.'" From his abundance we have all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the unique one, who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. Jesus is involved in everything. He comes and shows God to the world in his life, in his words, in his actions. He is ultimately God's self-expression to us of who he is. Beyond the words, beyond the stories, beyond the prophecies, God comes into our sphere and shows himself, reveals his said. You've heard it said, you've heard this said, you've heard that said, but here I am. Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So John is unequivocally saying to his readers, here is a book about God, and Jesus is God. In this prologue, we've seen some things that we'll pick up during the course of the next few weeks. We see, of course, what we've started with, the divinity, that Jesus is God. It's not just a human being, he's not just a prophet, he's not even God who just lives as a human being on earth, but he's God and he is man, because we will find too that we'll see the humanity of Jesus in this gospel. We'll see Jesus weeping. We'll see Jesus so concerned about people at a wedding that he cares enough to make wine for them. We'll see a lot of his humanity. We'll see that he's a life giver, that Jesus came to give us life. Whoever believes in him will not perish. I don't know if that's still the most well-known verse in the Bible. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, will not be destroyed, but will have everlasting life. We'll see, as we've read already in the prologue, that he's the light of the world. And there's a duality theme going on in John's Gospel, light and darkness, heaven, up and below, all these things that you writes about. You'll see angels descending up and down, coming because of who Jesus is. Jesus brings his light. I am the light of the world, he says. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Salvation is a big theme. The salvation that comes into the world, but to individuals, to lives that are changed, because what we see is we'll see that Jesus came for individuals. We'll see some conversations that he had with individuals. Very often the people who were the outcasts of society, people who were on the edges, people who are looked down upon. And Jesus spends time, and John records some great encounters that Jesus has with these people, because he came to bring them salvation that would change their lives and would change their futures and everything. So we'll see that. We'll see that salvation is for all. Salvation is for everyone, that nobody is excluded. We'll see that belief already is fundamental. The whole book is written that we might believe. And so it isn't something that we just take in, what just happens, but actually we have to actively believe and follow. You'll discover in John 6 that lots of Jesus' followers, lots of people who are hanging around watching the miracles, getting the bread that he was making and all that kind of stuff, suddenly disappeared because he spoke some hard truths and said, this is what following me is about. So, well, yeah, we kind of don't mind hanging around, but we don't actually want to believe. And Jesus wasn't worried about that, I like to think that many of those did come to believe. And actually there's a few people that we can see in the gospel accounts probably did come to believe later on. I'm thinking probably of people like Joseph of Arimathea, probably Nicodemus even, and others, that there's a sense in which people maybe didn't instantly respond. And that's a good thing, you see. It wasn't after kind of you had your chance, that's it. But do you know what? Jesus was not the best person to advertise himself, because he sent people away with problems. They came to him and he says, well, that's all right, we'll go and, yeah, great, you've kept all the commandments, that's really nice. We'll go and sell all your wealth, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. Well, come on, that's just too far, and can I follow you, Jesus? Yes, fine, but do you mind sleeping on the floor? Do you mind under the stars in the middle of winter? I don't have anything, got nothing to give you. If you want to come, you just pick up your cross and you follow me. Okay, can't you make it easy for me? Can I just pay you £5 a month and I'm part of your club, and I get a ticket into heaven? That's not. That's not what it is. But believe in him. Believe in him. And so we're challenged to believe. We're challenged to put our trust. We're challenged to follow him. Why? Because he is God. He is God. That's what John tells us. He is God. So this book comes from a different perspective. It doesn't come from us just trying to examine and work out, well, let me find out about God. Let me do it. It's coming from God says, this is who I am. Now have a look at what I'm like, at what Jesus is like. Have a look at what Jesus said, what Jesus did. And so we hope to explore that through the book of John. So all these themes are more in the book. As you read through, jot down how many different themes and how many different thoughts you can get through it. Read it. Maybe you want to read it through more than one translation. And I suggest always reading in modern translations. Again, it's this thing, people can get hung up about your translation and all that's not got this slight word. All the modern translations pretty much are incredibly accurate, but they give just a slightly different nuance. And if you just read the same thing in the same translation you always had, your brain is switched off. It's switched off after you've read it a number of times. So I do that. I read from different translations. You know, I look at them. Why? Because then I engage with it. It's a bit like singing a song. I don't know how many times it is they reckon once you've sung a song about 30 times you don't engage with the words anymore. That's why I always like us to have new songs and things, because it stops and you stop and think, and you're not just singing it out of sentiment or because you know it. You're actually engaging with the words. You're actually engaging with what it's about. You know, it's not just evoking some sort of past mood. Hey, and I'll have a lot of songs from the 60s that I play on my phone, etc. And with many of them, they evoke memories. They evoke a particular time. They evoke, friends, things that you were going through, and whatever. And I'm not listening really to the song. I'm thinking about those things. You know, so read the scripture. Maybe read it in a couple of different translations. Read it through. You know, and have a look and just get a feel for what it's saying to you. So as we engage with Scripture, God will speak to us. God will encourage us. God will reveal himself, because that is his nature. Let's pray.